I finally got around to watching a Child's Play franchise for the very first time, so it's time to talk about them. And welcome Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of the Child's Play franchise. Do you like them all, or is it sort of a mixed bag that ends up not being of your flavor? And taking it last place, we have Cult of Chucky, what ended up being the final entry of the main franchise, if you would say. Of course, there's all the inconsistencies, all these different problems coming into these different directors and writings just coming up with all these different things, making it last longer than makes sense for it. And this one kind of comes to a close in one sort of degree that has a fresh take on where it's headed, but it ultimately feels so sour with all the wrong takes, all of the wrong directions, taking it into this nursing home type of environment. It just feels like it's mixed in all the wrong ways, bringing about these changes and weird oddities where Andy's back, but he's hardly a part of the movie, even though they sort of set up the premise to be a big shebang, and they sort of ended off very open-ended where Andy is still alive, but it's a weird situation with all of these weird decisions, these inappropriate ways of going about the environment where the doctors should have some sense of belief of what's going on with this psychotic ward that's they're all immersed into, and the situation at hand should make them believe a little bit more of what these people are saying. And while it is a continuation from what we got from Curse of Chucky, it's something that just goes in all of the wrong ingredients, building up this environment that's just so socially bland and does not integrate the characters well into even making the kills compelling by any means. So you're built into this situation, trapped into this corner where, while it can be seen as a bold ending that I can appreciate, there's something that's just very open-ended about it, making all the wrong decisions, making all of the dialogue feel so awkward and mismanaged. The editing feels choppy by the way there's delays in the response to Chucky's laughs, the way we're falling about, that even though we're setting this up to be something where Chucky pretty much almost died in the previous film, you're contriving all the instances within the way that this story is being built upon that ultimately lands on a really, really sour note that picks up into a new franchise, but it's never really going to come back again. But taking in number 7, we have Child's Play 2019, the reboot that sort of had a promising premise to the get-go, taking on this robot AI sort of setting, making that the doll rather just being a plain old doll. But there's not necessarily anything huge and intricate about those details that makes it clean and cut to how these rules work. And while you suspend your disbelief to these types of films, how things work out and how it ultimately does turn out is something that just pales in comparison to where we're falling about. There should be more decisions made in a proper manner, so you're falling about a lot of horror tropes that you come to see before. And while you're getting this new form of family, even though it may be a similar cut and paste film to the first film, you're not necessarily getting all of the vibes that you want out of it, the scares that feel true, tied and true to what a horror film should emit. And while there is some fair instances where it is fine for what it's going after, I do like what it's headed toward, there's just an overall encompassing point where, even though I like Mark Hamill voicing Chucky, there's just not necessarily anything that feels fully flavorful, and all of the dialogue can feel a little awkward at some certain points. The editing, like I mentioned, like the past film, just does not deliver full circle, and feeling very unnatural and artificial at sometimes, given the circumstance of the robot. The building of these characters, the establishment of this character that is Chucky, now as a doll, just feels like it has its limits. That doesn't fully come through. Even though it starts as a reboot that could have had potential for more, it slowly dies down within the first reboot that it goes after. And taking at number 6, we have Child's Play 3. Now, this is one of those weird oddities where they take the main character of the film and take them into military school because of the trauma that he has faced. No one believes in him. Everything that goes about doesn't make sense, which almost feels like a copy and paste of the Omen 3 in its own circumstance, which is an odd trend that kind of happens sometimes with the third film. But regardless, taking Andy into this and kind of closing out Andy's trilogy to some degree, there's an odds to an end with this circumstance where it is fair in some points, but also feels like it's pretty cut and dry within what you're doing with all the tropes. There's pretty good kills, there's awesome moments here and there, but otherwise it's a rather bland story that doesn't totally gravitate toward me because it feels it's leaning a little bit too much to making the kills the prime focus of what we're doing, and the military school is just one of the more boring places you could focus in on an environment. It's not changing things up enough, and you're also confined to these areas where things should become more dangerous and the risk should be more circumstantial, but otherwise they get out of all of these different places when there shouldn't be as an easy access for that. And just following along all of these horror tropes, there's is sufficient enough ideas to this film as a whole, and it feels different enough because of the setting, but you're just still surrounding Andy as a character around all of these people that never believe him until it's the very last second. And building about that just creates this weird sort of environment where you may like a few things here and there, but otherwise the gravitas to this film loses steam quite a bit into the film. And taking in next place, we got Seed of Chucky. Now, following up with where it started off before, it does sort of make sense, and it adds a new twist onto where we're building about these characters taking on a son to Chucky. As weird as it is, you're getting a third character to the mix of the killers, and you're having a weird setback with the son of Chucky because he's someone that's scared of killing someone, but once he does, it becomes so easy and circumstantial and leads on to an interesting end, and that can be shocking, but of course it's easily retracted from the very ending credits of this film that leads on to, of course, more films. But even on its own 2 feet, going into this film, it has plenty of interesting environments, some new scares, an interesting way of building upon the blocks of these characters that's a little bit more on the Chucky side of things, and following about the son of Chucky that feels a little awkward at sometimes with the way they're doing all their maniacal laughs. That isn't always of my personal taste, but I still generally enjoy what we're getting out of the films from this point forward. That you're building upon something that, as ridiculous as some of the same things come to believe, you're going about an area where you suspend your disbelief to the wildness they take on. And while there is not necessarily anything you take deeply out of the human characters, there is a groundedness to this film enough that I can accept it for what it's going for. There's enjoyable moments, there's great kills, and an overall sensibility to the environment that you're enclosed within this area and building upon where we're headed within the traps that these characters set as a whole. And taking at number 4, we have The Bride of Chucky, the start of a new trilogy or ending of sorts to this becomes very interesting. It takes a little bit of a way to get into actual Bride of Chucky that builds upon another, of course, the wife to Chucky, that leads on to an interesting way back and forth between this girl, and all of them are set up to be a bit annoying in their own character tropes, but you still get some things where they're sort of set free. There's no enclosement to the place they are staying at, because once they're on the road, There's people they kill along the way, building upon the suspense of ideas that you're going about. And so there's not a whole lot of limits, and still being able to contain all these different kills along the road and doing all these different tricks while still establishing some decent human characters by their own means builds upon the ideas that it's ridiculous to some extent, but enjoyable to the matters that it's establishing with the Bride of Chucky, how they establish that it's weird and wacky, but this film fully embraces it for how it's still managing to take itself seriously to some standard and still building upon the blocks of who Chucky is as a villain, how he's excluding himself to all these different environments, and the kills just feel so self-sufficient to the horror and suspense that you're building upon and bringing about some laughs that actually express myself along the way. When taking next place, we got the Child's Play 2. What we're following up with the original film is a trauma film within what we're taking on with Andy, just facing Chucky, taking on this new foster home as his mother is put in this psychotic ward, and building upon this, even though we're not looking at the mother at all, and even though it sets up where we're headed in Child's Play 3, there's a grown-up version of Child's Play of Andy, what we're looking at him, and the contrast between, yes, we're still following the rules where no one believes that he is actually seeing Chucky be alive, killing all these people, doing all these things. There's still a groundedness and something that fleshes out this film in all of the best ways, the motivations for Charlie to move on, for everything about this foster sister to sort of be on his side a little bit, but not fully integrate herself into his life right away, because they're trying to gain a sense of who he is, how he is going to work out within the family. And so there's something that you still build yourself into. I understand the ideas it's going into, and for the early 80s, of course, you're still having this separation of understanding how this foster home works, and unfortunately the writers sort of are a little bit separated by how well these families would come to accept Andy, despite him kind of having these beliefs, that it's kind of annoying that they don't come to understand him. They create these boundaries right off the bat without coming to an understanding, even though that's what they would have known adopting him to begin with. But there is an embrace to this film that builds upon the blocks that, even though it isn't intricate within its writing, it still is having all the moments with Chucky coming from a factory, building upon where we're headed for this franchise, and leading on to such an interesting arc. Not that it's very deep within the cut that it's building upon, but you're still trapping yourself in this one house, building in this new neighborhood, and also taking things on the run a little bit, driving through this car, driving through all these different things that makes the ending a bit more suspenseful, a bit more scary, going back to the factory and being locked in this warehouse of Chucky's and everything that's going about that becomes so interesting, so compelling to the means that leads on to an end, having the right scares, but still containing itself to the silliness, to the goofiness that this Child's Play doll is coming to life, that Chucky is taking control of this environment, that leads on to a brutal ending with how Andy really builds upon the situation, takes on and embraces a sister that's her foster sister, leading on from that, becoming so interesting within the ways that it goes about its story beats and builds upon the grounds of what ultimately leads on to some other fresh new sequels. And for my runner-up, we have The Curse of Chucky, a much more grounded film that I would have come to expect out of any of the films from this franchise, making it feel like it's a reboot of its own worth, because on top of that, we get Chucky, that's a new doll being made for her, and this girl confined in with this wheelchair adds a new element to the film that twists some of the stakes that come about along the way, whether she's quick enough to get away from everything. And while there is something where there's a way that things shouldn't happen as slowly as they should, there's interesting components that's more character driven within this one, that is on top of the drama, on top of the horror, on top of what keeps this film grounded, is how you dig into this priest that comes along the way, going into this new house for the first time, and integrating all these other siblings, all this other family that's sort of moving in with what we're pulling about with this girl in this wheelchair that's being the central focus, but you're still getting this one way of following about with this camera that's sort of spying on everything. And that's where you find in some new reveals for the characters that are looking at it, that everyone finds out at the last second what's going on, outside of this one girl that is the focus and is seeing what is so creepy about this doll, about Chucky, and integrating this into the full front of where we're falling about, even though Chucky again has to restart from the beginning. He isn't speaking for most of the film, subject to the first film as well. There is something that's very well versed within what you're setting up for this franchise as a whole, that kicks off the gate with something that's so fresh to this franchise, something so serious within the approach that goes about. Because when you're looking at Chucky as a whole, he still has that similar type of feel to his character once you see him speaking again, but there is still a containment where he's not laughing maniacally every second of the way. You're not getting all of these brutal kills that makes him always the villain that you set him out to be, yet he still is, in essence, of the same character, building upon the same sort of motivation, the same sort of fear and suspense that he sets forward with this film. And the cinematography is surprisingly great and diverse than what you would have expected out of the other film and of what we get out of this film. Just looking to be a good film, even though it may not be insane within the way it works out its story. There's still some few problems here and there within motivations or whatnot, but there is a groundedness to this film that wins me over ultimately as a runner-up for where we're falling about within this otherwise silly franchise that I can enjoy and respect, even when you suspend your disbelief within some of the other sequels. But that takes me into my number one pick for the Child's Play franchise. The Child's Play, the originals that just sets up the ground, makes things feel so fresh, that I watched this a couple times before finally having run through the franchise for the first time this October, and being able to enjoy this once more was something that's grounded within the means to this mother that's poor, trying to support her child, ends up taking this from where we're going. You're setting up to the lore for Chucky and how he's connected to this one robber, and while you get some play on to where that gets established more within some of its sequels, building upon where we're looking at Andy and his mother about some of the inner workings to this story, just concrete builds upon what we're looking, containing yourself within this apartment at certain means, but also traveling to new areas, to Chucky's actual home, where he goes on to kill some of his team members. So there's a proper motivation to what he's trying to do, what Chucky is doing to kill others, and there's still a supernatural essence to this film, trying to take over Andy's life, being the control of the situation, and being of the essence something that's so compelling by the simplicity of this Chucky, that's a doll that is not doing anything for most of the film, similar to what the film I just talked about, but there's still an escalation to this film that works itself out in a better way because of the way he becomes crazier and crazier, and you think he's dead at some point, but then he comes back and comes back again in all of the strongest ways that makes it so internally intriguing and so suspenseful by the workings of the environment, by the workings of the backstory and the supernatural essence. And while you're not getting a lot about Andy and his mother, about their backstories, you're getting something that's so deeply integrated within the villain itself that even though it's just a toy doll by its pure sense, makes it that much more scary to the survival tactics that they have to go about with the stakes that are involved, creating this intricate and well-defined story that Tom Holland just directs so beautifully for its time, not being superficially amazing by its cinematography of any worth, but being able to track everything is easily as the way you're being able to follow along with the story, how it's grounded, how it's taking upon these characters that you can have sympathy for, that you can look at the stakes and putting yourself in the lives of what is going on. It can be as diverse and as terrifying as what this film actually expresses to the audience itself. So that's just my personal ranking of the Child's Play ranking, which I finally watched all of them for the first time. Make sure to comment down below your take on all these films. Do you like the franchise as a whole? Is it one of your favorite franchises, or is it one that drops below among the other horror franchises? Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join the Film Culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.